Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chariwag, Assistant Professor at the Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. Today we are going to discuss a module titled Relevance, Decline and Renewal of Agrarian Studies Part 2. This module is part of the paper titled Agrarian Relations and Social Structure in India. This paper is coordinated by Dr. Manish Thakur of IIM Kolkata. What this module titled Relevance, Decline and Renewal of Agrarian Studies is going to discuss. This module will discuss factors that has led to the decline of scholarly interest on agrarian studies. Further, it will also question the plea for the renewal of agrarian studies and also look into how it is important for us sociologists to go back to the agrarian studies. Further, it will also focus on the importance of studies, especially in the change that the agrarian sector is now experiencing. Village in the new economy. We drew your attention to the so-called urban bias as an implicit motive in the dominant blueprint of development that the newly independent India went for. Nehru was very clear in his agenda of modernization and used to equate modernization with urbanization, which was expected to pull India out of its rampant poverty and past backwardness and put it on the road to progress. The development of Chandigarh was symbolic of his approach towards the city as a vital element in the process of development. The construction of Chandigarh confirmed Nehru's confidence in planned urbanization, and the final work of the architect Le Corbusier was something that was considered to be Indian rather than Western. This inclination towards urbanization was strengthened further by the economic policies in the era after Nehru. Indira Gandhi reinforced the status model of development through nationalization of banks and the land redistribution reforms. There was also an additional dosage of populism through the Garibi Hatao rhetoric. This had an adverse impact on the economic growth, and the gap between the state capacity and popular expectation of poverty alleviation increased. Sustained economic growth and the coherent political party and bureaucracy were prerequisites for poverty alleviation. But what ultimately happened was the deinstitutionalization of the Congress party and the fragmentation of the state authority structure. Instead of channelizing public resources in agriculture, infrastructure, public sector industries, education and health, spending was done to buy political support. The overall economic climate in the country did not support investment and growth. In the backdrop of mass starvation and famine, through agriculture sector received investment. It was mainly concentrated in finding better seeds and fertilizers in the already rich agricultural states. The focus was on increasing productivity than bringing more land under cultivation through investment in irrigation. In this entire process, the state and the propertied class of farmers benefited, and hence the goals of redistribution were not achieved in spite of public investment in agriculture during Green Revolution. A similar alignment of the state and the elite was seen in the 1980s, but this time the elites were of the industrial sector. This led to higher economic growth in the 1980s and further failed to achieve the goals of redistribution. The focus in the entire process of industrial growth was on the productivity growth, which is achieved at the cost of employment generation. The growth first policy of the 1980s got further strengthened by economic reforms in the 1990s, after which the decline in the agricultural sector began to set in. The growing inequality has had an adverse impact on the rural-urban divide too. The agricultural growth rates plummeted, leading to lower incomes in the countryside. The cities continued to become rich more rapidly, which only hastened urbanization. In the rural areas, agriculture had taken a backseat and non-farm sector was growing. The rural non-farm sector till 1983 was small, and there were 12 states which had rural non-farm employment below 20%. Therefore, only 5 states had rural non-farm employment more than 20%. But within 20 years, this scenario has changed substantially. As per the 50th round of NSS held in 1993-94, about 32.9% of the rural households were outside agriculture. The percentage had gone up to 35.2% by the 57th round. States like Punjab, Kerala and Haryana had more than 50% of the rural household involved in non-agricultural activities. Jammu and Kashmir, West Bengal, Himachal Pradesh and Bihar had around 40% of the household in non-agricultural occupations. This change in the trend of employment is, however, not in proportion to rural prosperity. Developed states like Maharashtra and Gujarat have rural non-farm employment less than 20% and they rank below Orissa, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh in terms of rural non-farm employment. In rich agricultural states of Punjab and Haryana, also the rural non-farm employment has increased to around 30%. In Himachal Pradesh, the increase in the sector were almost double from 12.4% to 25.2%. Around one-third of the male workers, as per data, no longer work in the primary sector in the rural areas. The service sector attracts a majority of those engaged in rural non-farm employment. According to a study, the service sector comprises of the largest share of employment than manufacturing in the non-farm employment category. The non-farm sector contributes 45% of the rural net domestic product, which only throws light on the growing importance of the service sector in rural areas. This increase in the non-farm sector can be understood as both a cause and effect of a number of factors. First, the scope of agriculture employment due to lower wages and smaller land holdings have gone down. The agricultural sector's contribution to the national GDP decreased as explained earlier, and there was a limited investment to increase the productivity of the sector. With the decline of agriculture, the transfer of land for non-agricultural usage began to be carried out at an increasing rate. It has been observed that average size of land holdings in India diminished from 2.28 hectares in 1771 to 1.23 hectares in 2005-06. The proportion of marginal holdings has increased now and is around 64.8%. Secondly, there has been a refocusing of the rural aspirations as well. The increase in rural non-farm employment in Punjab and Haryana can be attributed to the increase in agricultural production, which creates a need for complementary non-farm activities like harvesting and others. But the increase in the non-farm employment in other states like Assam, West Bengal, Bihar remains unexplained. It has been argued in several places that the rural non-farm employment is symbolic of distressed employment. This is because in terms of stagnant agricultural growth, the rural non-farm employment has increased, which only indicates that the rural unemployed is in search of jobs and it is they who get absorbed in non-farm sector. The majority of workers in the non-farm sector were those with less than 10 acres of land. It is clear that poorer the farmer, the greater is the pressure to look for employment outside farming. In India, however, owning 10 acres of land is not necessarily an indication of distress. In Punjab and West VP, all these farmers are active in the non-farm sector. The Adi Dharmis and Jats in Jalandhar own stores, run STD booths, sell grocery and other such similar activities. In Uttar Pradesh, the scenario is different. The non-land owning caste are the ones which are more involved in non-farm activities. Thus, be it land owning or non-land owning household, what is widespread is that there is a general disenchantment with the village life. People living in village have the ambition to live outside it for a better life. The availability of off-farm employment drives the people outside villages, and these locals are migrant laborers of the city who are ready to work for less also. This is possible because this less wage is also better than what is available in the agricultural sector. The availability of jobs outside the farm sector is important, which is driven by factors like public utilities, investment. It has been pointed out in a study by Visaria that villages which have gas, electricity, water are the ones where rural non-farm employment is also high. This means that as modernity penetrates, more and more people leave farm jobs and choose to get employed in non-agricultural operations. India has turned out to be a service-driven economy in a process of structural change in output between primary, secondary and tertiary sectors. But this structural change in output is not accompanied by a structural change in employment. For the first time post 2004 and 5 and 2004 to 2009 and 10 planned periods did large number of people, nearly 10% of the agricultural workforce, abandoned agriculture. Employment in the non-agricultural sector grew by 25 million and from 2009-10 to 2011-12. It even increased with a simultaneous fall in the employment in agriculture. But a closer look at the subsectors of non-agricultural sector reveals that the increase is driven by an expansion in the labor-intensive subsectors, mainly construction. The development of urban centers has pulled workers out from the agriculture as the total employment in construction almost doubled by 2011 to 12. Other sectors where the fluctuations in employment has been seen are the subsectors within manufacturing like textiles, wearing apparels, non-metallic mineral products and the wood products and other labor-intensive sectors. But the share of these sectors in the total manufacturing value added has remained constant. It can hence be implied that it is a low productivity, small scale enterprises which are driving employment. Employment within the service sector has mainly been in telecom due to the increase in tele-density and also in education, health and real estate. The increasing influence of education through public programs in rural areas has a strong influence on the young minds. Increasing penetration of media into the rural areas has impacted rural India at the cultural level. The old taboos against holding certain types of jobs are disappearing. Untouchability is not practiced as widely as it is used to be in earlier times. Even households which are economically prosperous seek a future outside village as discussed earlier. It has been seen that not many farmers are found satisfied. The wealthy landed people of the village have political leverage also and have come together to form an interest group in the environment of growing caste politics. It is only because of their aspirations to secure well-paying government jobs in urban centers that they lobby for acquiring an OBC status. The recent case of Jat community fighting to be declared as OBC confirms the agenda of these groups to gain through the route of reservation. Against this background, the emergence of new image of village is to be understood. The image of the rural areas being home to unsuccessful poor people is ingrained in the minds of the people since longer time. City is the new hope and is the place where it would create avenues for growth. Nothing else can justify the growing migration to cities in spite of inhuman living conditions in slums where migrant population resides in cities. In such a scenario, the village was understood since the colonial times that would cease to exist. The cultural aspects of village only exist in urban nostalgia. It is described as a waiting room from where everybody wants to escape as soon as they get a chance. With the growing cacophony of individual caste and political agenda attached to it, the village has taken a back seat and caste is the new determinant of individual identity. To understand the new village, it is no longer required for social anthropologists to get immersed in a village. They would rather go to a slum and railway stations in the cities where the erstwhile rural population subsists. In the current economic political environment, the regnant public policies have further marginalized the village. Right from the policies of rural development to the current focus on developing smart cities and bullet trains, the policies appear to bypass the underdeveloped villages. These policies are miles away from pro-village philosophy of Gandhi or Tagore, who wanted to bring back to the villages. The influence of Western education and its extensive reach has been an important factor in changing the imagery of the village. The health system in villages is in shambles. The villagers are dependent on urban centers for secondary and tertiary and at times even primary health level care needs. Village is therefore a place of dreadful diseases and limited opportunities for socio-economic growth. Under the forces of globalization, liberalization and transnational culture, what is today important is to create a place for this new village. The ruralities have to be understood in altogether different manner and the policy framework has to be shaped accordingly to cater to new needs of rural India. With the growing agitation of people in the hinterland and the popular aspirations to achieve higher standards of living, policy measures have to be designed accordingly. The meaning of the word development has acquired perhaps need revision as the existing modality has not been successful in achieving the goals of redistribution. In the absence of redistribution, rural areas which lack resources have been further marginalized and urban centers are also home to several problems due to the rural-urban migration. Agrarian crises. As demonstrated by Levin, the recent phenomena of free market capitalism is post-reform India has been unable to address the agrarian crisis. Agrarian transformation in India is a unique one unlike the agrarian capitalism in the West. The recent emergence of special economic zones in India is an illustration of the concept of accumulation by dispossession of the Indian capitalism, which has led to a very distinct form of agrarian transformation. This transformation is non-labor absorbing and real estate driven and is therefore responsible for further marginalization of the poor. This is happening in the wider context of economic transition to establish a capitalist economy. In the broader ambit of development, the large-scale dispossession is resulting in seizing of lands in the hands of capital but not production. There is a real estate-driven agrarian revolution that is taking place, resulting in the transfer of agricultural land for non-agricultural purposes. Several commercial farmers, due to the grabbing of the land by the capital, have been reduced as subsistence-level farmers. These peri-urban residents have been pushed into such livelihood activities such as working in brick kilns or nearby shops. In several cases, the effect of receiving cash in lieu of land has led to increase in idleness and alcoholism, as the basic nature of the daily life has changed with the disposition of land. Impact of disposition on agrarian structure is deep and transformed the lives of the farmers in more ways than one. SEZ, the developer, is a state-appointed capitalist landlord which has made the state a key player in the entire process of disposition. With respect to capital investment in agriculture sector remains neglected, and more producers end up becoming laborers in the informal sector. In the entire process of land transfer from farmers to industrialists, the compensation received is spent on non-productive activities like paying off debts, building pakka houses, marriage, or buying similar tracts of land in some other places. In this process, they not only end up buying land of bad quality but also have to incur transportation costs to work on that new piece of land. Such an arrangement is not in the interest of individual farmers or the overall agrarian economy. On rare occasions, they open small shops in village, but that is not an indicator of emerging entrepreneurship. These shops are merely avenues for subsistence and are not the beginning of an enterprise. At other times, they also have no option but to become part of the large informal sector. According to Mehrotra, the major driver of employment growth has been the unorganized sector. About 70% of the total non-agricultural force has been employed in medium-scale enterprises which employs less than 10 workers. This mainly falls within the large informal sector, which has left the workers vulnerable to the risk of retrenchment at the event of slightest economic shock. It is therefore important that more jobs in the formal sector are created. Employment in manufacturing sector declined in the period 2004-5, and this has been mainly due to the falling demand of manufacturing export, rising import intensity of manufacturing output, and raising wages. These factors indicate that manufacturing sector is becoming increasingly capital intensive. At the lower end of wage and skill distribution, due to a rise of price of labor in the open market in rural areas, migration from rural to urban areas has decreased. This has created a need to mechanize the manufacturing sector. Further, on the upper end of the spectrum, the shortage of skill has emerged in both manufacturing and service sector. To achieve a growth which is accompanied by an increase in real income, it is important that productivity of labor is increased on a large scale. Currently, there is an inverse relation seen between employment generation and gross value added. The unorganized manufacturing sector, absorbing 65% of the employment, only contributes 35% to the total output, which results in very low productivity. With a large share of population working at such a low productivity, economic growth would not be sustainable. Under the impact of global forces, India has been witnessing a shift in the pattern of demand of skills from the industry. In the job market, the demand grew fastest for the skilled workers and slowly for the less skilled workers. Since 2000, employment has been among the least skilled workers employed in cleaning of buildings or construction jobs, soared where jobs held by middle and high skilled workers declined. There is therefore a hole in the middle. Highly skilled work in the current times require complex cognitive and interpersonal tasks which are even beyond the abilities of a reasonably qualified person. The innovation brought about by increase in technology has brought emerging economies into premature deindustrialization stage. Similar are the views of many Arvind Subramaniam, Chief Economic Advisor to the Indian government, who claims that emerging economies today are less reliant on manufacturing in terms of output or employment than they have been in past. China was probably the last country to be able to ride industrialization into middle income status. The emerging economies have lost the industries at the low income levels mainly because of the change in the role of technology in development since 1980s. Cheap and powerful ICTs has led to unbundling of the manufacturing sector, and cheap supply chain has scattered all around the world. Countries can grab pieces of the supply chain and get rewarded with lots of manufacturing jobs, but these are highly vulnerable to shocks in other countries' economy. Another major change brought about by technology has been dematerialization of economic activity. Goods shipments, even though continue to occupy 80% of the global trade in terms of value added, the importance of goods trades today stands at 57%. This is because of increasing demand of services and production of traded goods. It is referred to as knowledge-intensive trade, which requires high level of skill if substantial value addition has to be made. The need for labor has been eliminated as the cost of automation has decreased. These global forces would have definite impact on the structural transformation and seep down to the social and cultural realities of the villages as well. Technology has already penetrated to a large extent in rural India, and the new policies to strengthen education and health outcome have brought about significant change in the aspirations of rural India. The recurrent farmer suicide and persistence of agrarian distress call for the robust social safety net in the agrarian sector. Be that as it may, it is undeniable that more and more people are moving away from agriculture. In case of rural India, there is an absolute decline in total employment in agriculture and allied activities. This decline has to be compensated with the creation of quality jobs in the non-agricultural sector. This cannot be done without creating better environment to function for the small and medium scale industries and micro enterprises which employ majority of the labor force. Also, the self-employed and enterprising people in the informal economy should be connected through information and communication technology to create better marketing and selling platforms for them. Market economy must be made amenable through the ICT for informal sector to generate better income. Access to health care and education could be enhanced through the ICT to reap larger benefits in future. The government needs to craft policy in a manner that benefits of technological progress reach the maximum number of people. The market economy and ICT must be designed in a manner that inequality decreases and big business do not remain the only ones who benefit from globalization and innovation. It is time a conceptualization of rural India moved beyond the nationalist glorification of the village. New ways of perceiving village is required, especially in the changing global and national context. The upsurge in technology and increasing influence of the environmental activism would influence the way in which the new conceptualization of village is shaped. Village for a long time has been seen as a place which represents serene paradise with a perfect community life, which is opposite of urban industrial problems prevalent in cities. Village is central to several environmental and alternative technology movements in India, and it impacts the various forms of politics and volunteerism. It has been seen as a place with traditional wisdom and visions of sustainable life. It is likely that the newer perception of village would be shaped over the influence of globalizing discourses of environment. Over a period of time, the caste factors which kept the village hierarchical were a major point of criticism for village have weakened. The influence of education and greater awareness about newer and sustainable ways of life would create a village based on traditional wisdoms of living but possibly a diluted caste structure. There is skepticism attached to this weakened social structure as expressed by Bardhan. In his critique of the anarcho-communitarian suggestion of decentralization in India, he brings out the hollowness and formlessness of the new village society which has led to new political boundaries and caste identities. According to him, the recent unrest in the hinterlands against arrogance of the contemporary development model has less to do with modernist vision but related to the institutional vacuum created by weakening of the traditional village social structure. The traditional pattern system was vital to keeping the village integrated, and with elimination of these systems, the citizens have come in direct contact with the state. The state, however, throughout post-independence period has not been able to achieve its goal of redistribution and inclusive growth. The future of village as an alternative way of life, assuring sustainability in the absence of social structure which held it together, remains ambiguous. The need, therefore, is to revive studies related to rural India in a manner that social and cultural requirements in the context of new global economic forces are understood. In conclusion, students, we could see four important issues that have emerged. First, there is a need on studies on multinational agricultural business corporations that has invaded the agrarian structure in India. Secondly, what is important is we have to focus on the way undoing of land ceiling legislation and how that has impacted the agrarian structure, may be leading to increased agrarian distress that we are experiencing. Third, the students also would have understood about how agrarian issues such as in terms of understanding in terms of distress and all has to be located within the larger historical, economic and socio-economic context. Further, at the end, the students would also understand how migration studies and rural labor are very closely connected, so that we could think of having an interdisciplinary understanding of agrarian studies. Thank you.